Howdy, folks. Happy Thursday. It is sweltering in Buffalo. I have to get used to temperatures over 70 because I consider anything over 70 sweltering.
That's true, because we watched Mike defrost in Dallas at the draft. By the time we got to 7-Eleven, Mike was like Frosty the Snowman, but fully defrosted. It was so funny.
Well, Joe, I mean, I don't know if you were at the draft in Dallas, but we came out of the building that first night after the first round, and it was like 11 o'clock or something like that, and it was over 100 degrees, and my glasses fogged up, and I wasn't wearing a mask. I mean, my glasses just and I was like, oh my God, like it was just so.
I thought he was going to die in 7-Eleven. That's how bad.
I'm melting.
You just climbed inside the beer cooler at that point. Just be like, just leave me here. I'll be fine. Everything's fine.
Go ahead, Russ.
So this isn't going to be about Mets and Yankees, Mike. This is just going to be about people and personalities. I'll start with Pete Alonso. So what Pete Alonso said yesterday about MLB manipulating the balls, we know they manipulate the balls. We don't know if they do it in concert with what's going to be going on the free agent market so teams could save money. But I will tell you this. Because the players and owners are at such odds right now and have very little chance of labor peace and a very great chance of a strike, I can't push it away. And I actually applaud Pete if this is what players were saying under their breath but afraid to say it. And I think that's what was going on.
Yeah, this whole labor thing with baseball has been boiling for 4 or 5 years now. At this point, like we know there's going to be it's going to be a lockout. Like we just know, like there's no way, it's unavoidable at this point, unless something absolutely obscene happens. But Pete Alonso is 100% right. Like I know like people were reacting like, "Whoa, that's a crazy thought."
I know.
Really? Did you see how many guys were hitting like 30, 40 home runs a couple of years ago, and now nobody can hit? But I mean, I think there's also something to be addressed where guys aren't taught to hit the way they used to. And it sounds like, old guy yelling at clouds, but it's 100% true. Like all the shifts and stuff like that, like the way to score runs is to just get runs yourself. And that means home runs. But
even Alonso as a power hitter hits to other fields. The guys that are strict pull hitters now.
The game is a friggin' bore. I went to go see the Blue Jays and the Astros Sunday afternoon at Salem Field. My first major league game in almost 2 years.
And he complained about the heat.
Well, it was ridiculous. Even though there was a wind coming off the 190, which it was the smell of Cheerios, so it wasn't that bad. At about the third, fourth inning, I was suffering from heat stroke and bored out of my mind. Now the heat stroke I can take care of, but the bored out of my mind was because, everybody with the friggin' launch angle, it's either you're hitting a home run or you're hitting a pop out or you're grounding out to shortstop. It's a boring game now. There's no running. There's no stolen bases. There's no bunting. There's no strategy. It's all swinging from your heels. And honestly, it sucks. It really sucks.
So the second part of this is part 2 with Garrett Cole after his victorious win. The first night, we know how he acted, and he seemed surprised. Although he's in the number 1 media market in the world and he's an ace for the New York Yankees, he should be able to field a question like that. The second time, I hated his answer because he was like, well, I only paused because of the specificity of it, which again is not a word Garrett Cole uses, and this isn't the forum for it. No, Garrett, this is the forum for it. This is actually where you talk about these things. So we write about these things so everybody finds out about these things. And that's where he is completely wrong. Whoever coached him coached him incorrectly.
So what that tells you is that he had a sit down with Yankees PR and they told him how to answer it to not get in trouble, because it was Ken Davidoff, I think, who asked the original question about, and he fumbled it. He fumbled it like Kamala Harris fumbled her question in her press conference a couple days ago. But the whole thing is it's building up towards, like Joe said, it's building up towards this new CBA and a lockout. The two sides are at loggerheads. And Michael Kay said something interesting about this when he heard about the whole thing with Alonso. If what Alonso is stating is true, then the PA has dropped the ball, because that is something that should be grieved, and it's not being grieved. Now that means either they have no proof or they just think it is, but if you can't say that kind of stuff if you don't have proof.
Look, if Josh Donaldson has proof, I mean, I wrote about this on Full Press last week. If he has proof, the commissioner should see it.
Right.
And maybe he has, and he's keeping it on the slide, but I don't think Rob Manfred's that good. So I don't think it's happened yet. And that's where that should come from. But it has been illegal all season. And so guys who had been doing it all year, I guess this was like the final warning, like when that teacher says, listen, you do it one more time and you're going to get kicked out and go to the principal. And that did happen to me a couple times. So there is the point when that happens.
Only a couple, Russ?
Well, one time they threatened to paddle me.
By the way, what's
school? In high school, actually junior high school, they had a paddleball racket paddle. And it didn't have the holes in it. So it was aerodynamic and it was solid. And if you did something wrong, you got it right in the tush pretty hard. And so I don't know what I was doing, talking to class, whatever. And I was in the principal's office, and they called my mother, and she went down there and she got me a stay of execution by threatening to sue them, which is pretty much the way to do it. And I may have been the first one to get out of it because someone's parent decided to say, listen, do whatever you want to my kid verbally. You're not assaulting him. And that's really what it was. But that was a thing that used to go on in school, which is crazy, right? But back in the day.
Well, hey. All right, let's start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, June 10th, 2021.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology. I am wearing this shirt because I don't have a wig. So, yes, the Islanders are victorious, and I'm wearing an Islander shirt. Cam knows why. And this is actually Dan Petru's old show with Noel. They rebranded it and stuff. So, anyhow.
And I'm Michael Lagello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. We welcome Joe Yerdon to the show, and we have one less series to talk about because last night the aforementioned New York Islanders eliminated the Boston Bruins in 6 games. And I know I'll hear from my buddy NL King on Twitter asking me to do a mea culpa because I picked the Bruins in 6 games, and I'll express my feelings on that in the next few minutes. But Joe, let's get your thoughts on that series because Russ and I were talking last night, and full marks to the Islanders for the victory.
Absolutely.
But I have to say, the Islanders out-Bruined the Bruins because they targeted Brandon Carlo in either game 1 or game 2. The high hit by Clutterbuck knocked him out of the series. Last night, I was doing some yard work, and Russ called me and told me that they were targeting and knocked out McAvoy, and he came back in the game. But that's stuff that the Bruins used to do, and they didn't do it in this series, and the Islanders did it with reckless abandon. What did you think of the series?
I think it lived up to every bit of the anticipation that I think everybody had for it because the way the Islanders have played all playoffs has been kind of roughneck. I mean, they're getting more marks for being boring, which I get it. It's a Trotz team, and they have a pretty serious lack of major star power, so I get it. But they play very physical, and that line with Clutterbuck and Cizikas and those guys, they play hard constantly, and their defense they all hit. They all hammer everybody. There's nobody that's really soft back there. I guess Letty would be the one you would say is not really a physical guy, but he's had to adapt, so he does that. So them outdoing the Bruins in that is kind of a surprise. And you know what? Losing 3 defensemen, in Boston's case,
but what about hammering them high, Joe? There's one thing where it's like, okay, look, we're going to hit you. Mm-hmm. They're used to that. They'll do that. But we're talking about guys who are getting hit in the head. Carlo against the glass. And listen, the way Palmieri hid that one yesterday, I applaud Keith Jones for not hiding it on the intermission show, and did a very good job of basically saying not only did that have a massive effect keeping them out of the game for 6 minutes, but that was their game plan, and they won the game as a result. And that is true because that is when the game changed. And so my basic problem here is if this was 1980 Russ, I'd be like, yeah, I get it. This is the way we play hockey now. But this isn't the way it's really supposed to be now, and they're doing it that way. I don't think they'll get away with it against Tampa. They did get away with it against Boston, and they scored goals when they needed to. But that was a big thing because if you started – remember what the Islanders were like when they were down a few defensemen a couple of years ago. It was hard for them to win too. So I don't like the fact that this was Trotz's game plan, and I do think he hides from this because everybody goes, well, it's Barry Trotz, he's the greatest coach, and this is his system. But now his system has changed to a very dirty system.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I don't when it comes to especially the Palmieri hit. The Palmieri hit's gross.
It was gross
last night. I mean, there was nothing hidden about that. He just straight up
and the refs are just like shrugging his shoulders.
Off me.
Hey, you didn't see anything. Okay, I guess we can't go to video, right? Like, we have video.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't blame Cassidy for the comments that he made that got him fined $25,000 by the league based on the over. Now, you can say, okay, well, that's the pot calling the kettle black when it comes to the Bruins because they have guys like Marchand who've done that over the years. But we're talking about the here and the now. And if you looked at this series, I think the Islanders were clearly the aggressors. I think they, and I have no problem about aggressive hockey, but I have a problem about illegal hits and Clutterbuck on Carlo. I mean, Carlo has had a history of concussion problems. I'm sorry, you cannot tell me that Clutterbuck didn't know that when he goes high on him. And Russ was telling me last night about them targeting McAvoy. Well, McAvoy's their best defenseman. If you knock him out of the series, it's sort of similar to what I was advocating, which is the Bruins not knocking out Barzal, but laying the body on Barzal because Barzal is clearly the best player on the Islanders.
And the unfair part is, so once you do that, right, you're super loading minutes onto Matt Grzelcyk, and then he started making mistakes. He was having a good game up to that point. He actually made some really good defensive plays, but then he all of a sudden gets blamed for turnovers. Well, why is he getting blamed for turnovers? Because he had to make up all those shifts when McAvoy was out. That's a hard thing for Grzelcyk. He's not that guy.
And especially when it means putting more minutes on guys like further down that lineup, like Lauzen, Lazon.
Yeah, there's a certain amount.
Yeah, like he makes that turnover in overtime that leads to the Islanders win in I forget which game it was, but like game two. Thank you. And like that. I mean, that's kind of what happens. Like that's the exact sort of stuff that carries on from that. But you know what? This shines the light on the league, just changing the rules as they go. Like when it comes to the playoffs, they just. It's I think I favorited a tweet today that said the NHL prides itself on speed, skill, and ability, winning you in the regular season, and then priding on none of that when it comes to the playoffs because it's just whatever. If you can get away with it, cool, you're going to go far. And like
at the very least,
the way it's been.
Right. At the very least, if Nick Ritchie got fined $5,000, Palmieri should get it fined at least $5,000 or $10,000, and I'm not even sure that's going to happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There hasn't been any kind of announcement yet, so I would think that they would have already made that announcement if it was the case. Now, okay,
nobody should feel bad for the Bruins. I didn't say this because listen, most years I'm not going to feel bad for the Bruins either, but I think this could happen to any team, and I think that's the issue here. And I'm pretty sure John Cooper is going to be well aware of this and probably work a game plan accordingly.
Now, just looking at the Bruins and sort of doing a dissection or an autopsy on them, they're sort of at a crossroads right now, Joe, because starting in goal, first of all, I don't believe the stuff about Bruce Cassidy. I think I can't see any reason why they wouldn't bring him back. He's been a really good coach for them. So I can't see any changes there. But they have both their veteran goaltenders, Rask and Halak, are UFA. Rask after the game didn't specify what was wrong with him, but he said he was battling through an injury, and according, I think it was Fluto Shinzawa reported it's either a lower back or a hip flexor that he might have to have surgery on. So, and they have Swayman and Vladar as their young goalies in the system. So starting with the goalies, and they're really in a transition period about whether they're going to bring back either one of the veteran goaltenders and whether they're going to make the change over to the young guys.
And I do want to recap for the chat room. We did say the Islanders won. They won the series. They beat the Bruins at their own game.
Yep.
We talked about how they won. If we're not going to talk about them for 20 minutes straight, sorry guys, but the story was the McAvoy hit. It really was. The Islanders winning is the story after that. Yeah. But that did one led to the other. That is just the way it is.
Don't worry, guys. We'll talk about the Islanders when they lose to Tampa. But Joe, let's talk about the Bruins goaltender. Sorry about that.
I'm going to be fascinated to see what they do with this, because I mean, there's a select few people in Boston that beat the drum anytime they lose. That it's Tuukka's fault. Even to the point where Kevin Paul DuPont likes to say he makes fun of it too by just hashtagging Tuukka's fault for, it's like, oh, hey, it took me a little longer to get to the arena. Tuukka's fault.
I mean, but Tuukka was like a frog with his legs paralyzed at the end. He was just falling on the puck. He couldn't move anymore. His hips were so bad.
But I guess that kind of thing falls on Cassidy to be able to know. It's like being able to read when your pitcher's still got it or not.
That's true.
Not to bring back, the guy's going to say, yeah, I still got another one in me, but you got to be able to know, like, no, you don't. Like, let's change this up a little. But I mean, it's such a hard spot because he's brought you so far before, brought you within a win of the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. Like, that's, you have to trust that he's going to give you his absolute best. And I don't think that he didn't. It's just, sometimes you're just too hurt to get by it. But throwing Jeremy Swayman into that spotlight, you don't know how that's going to affect him. I mean, he's the typical kind of weird goalie where like nothing seems to phase him and he's just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, it's still the playoffs, and like throwing him to the Wolves, especially with the way the Islanders hound the net and the way that they're able to attack things. How does he handle that? Like, do you have faith? Do you want Halak? I don't know if Halak was still hurt or whatever, but
he's not.
Like, no, I got a report from somebody that said he just played terribly down the stretch, and they liked what Swayman did at the end of the year, and they just decided that Swayman would be the backup and Halak would be sort of the emergency goalie.
Mm-hmm.
So that would lead me. Yeah, that would lead me to believe that Halak's not coming
Somebody
back.
had a good question in the chat room. They asked me if I felt like Wahlstrom was going to get back in when he's healthy for Zajac. But, Zajac has woken up. And I think based on the fact that he is a veteran and those guys know what he used to be able to do, he's going to get most of the opportunity until he goes cold again. If he goes cold again, then I think you'll see Wahlstrom. But to start, it's going to be Zajac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just going back to Rask, if Rask is a torn labrum, that's what Pekka Luukkonen had in terms of his surgery a couple years ago. That was like a 6-month recovery. That's a long recovery. So if it is something like that, then that probably is going to be taken into consideration by Don Sweeney about bringing him back or not bringing him back, because he won't be available probably. Well, let's see. Probably wouldn't be available until November or December.
And I don't think he's coming back. I really think he's retiring. I really do. I think that's why he laid it all out on the line here. And I think maybe that's why Cassidy let him lay it all out on the line, because, even Kevin Paul DuPont was saying on Twitter, hey, this could be, Rask's last period as a Bruin. And that still leaves it open. But I just, for the last 2 years, since the bubble thing and now reading into Rask, having interviewed him a million times, I just feel like he might just walk away. It doesn't matter about the age. Like sometimes guys just, the family, there's everything else to start worrying about. Like he hasn't won the cup, but I don't know if he's going to hang around another 5 years hoping to win a cup, even if he goes somewhere else.
Well, he won a cup in 2011, but he
didn't win it, though.
He didn't win. It was Thomas.
It's the Tim Thomas Cup, and you never want to be – he has a ring, right? He's never going to wear that ring. I guarantee it.
Now, defensively, they're again, they moved on from Chara before the season. Now they have 2 UFAs in Miller and Riley. Riley played well for them.
I'd re-sign Riley. Riley is starting to actually figure out his role in the NHL. He had a higher ceiling a while back.
Right.
But then there's that point where the rubber meets the road and you have to know what you are as a player. I think Riley knows what he is as a player now.
Carlo is a restricted free agent with arbitration eligibility, and he's coming off the concussion. And then you have McAvoy with a year left in his contract, Grzelcyk with about 3 years left in his contract, and they have a bunch of first-round pick guys like Zaboro and Vakanainen really haven't.
I mean, Zaboro's really nothing. Vakanainen could be a bottom pairing guy because he can move the puck and can be physical. Those early concussions did set him back a little, but he could play. So I think you'll see him. Zaboro they'll use because they just feel like they have to push it at this point, but he really doesn't do much.
But Joe, I get the feeling that looking at this roster of defensemen, they could be in the mix for trading for Seth Jones or making a big splash for a defenseman. Maybe the Ekman Larson stuff comes up again because we heard his name attached to Boston.
Yeah, I think dipping into free agency is a little perilous just because it's never easy to get through, and you're not sure what you're totally going to get because that the way free agency works now, those guys are coming up on like that fall off point where either they stay good for a few more years or that they're already on the decline. But that's where I look at, you're kind of taking flyers on guys until your people really develop and get into a spot. That's why I think Vakainen is probably more likely to just get moved up because he's always been on that cusp for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And that's where I think Buffalo fans will hate me for saying it, but Jake McCabe, it seems like he's coming off ACL, a torn ACL. So that's its own set of issues, but I mean, he's the typical kind of hard-nosed sort of defenseman. I think he would thrive in a place like Boston, but that still comes with risk though. That's what you're kind of running into if you're trying to go in a free agency. That's where a trade. I'm down on Seth Jones based on his play the last couple of years. I'm not. He was great 3 years ago. I'm not feeling it now. And I don't know if that's just a product of Columbus being bad or if it's just
part of that.
Just him.
I think he was fighting it there, and I still in viewings that I had live of Seth Jones, he still didn't let me down that way. Maybe his offense dropped, but I think because that whole team dropped, and even towards this last year, was he giving his best coaching effort? I'm not sure because he knew he was out, and so I think all of that was a factor. Good question. One other thing about Boston is obviously we'll have to see what Taylor Hall does. Is he a man of his word? Is he going to sign there and not break the bank? Because if he breaks the bank, they're not going to sign him. You know how the Bruins are.
It's more than just that. They have 3 UFAs: Krejci, Hall, and to a lesser extent Corrali. I don't think Corrali did himself any favors in the Islanders series. I thought he was pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't know if Corrali is back.
But Krejci, Joe, we know Krejci's been the centerpiece of that second line and their power play, but he's 35 years old. They're not going to pay him $7.25 again. It's a question of whether he wants to stay there for a year or two and take less, or if he wants to hit one more big contract. Him and Hall, are big question marks for Don Sweeney.
Yeah, that's the bulk of their second line, and listen, they had a ton of success with those guys during the regular season and for part of the playoffs too. I can't even really judge it against the Islanders because the Islanders make everything impossible. And I mean that in a good way. They make it so frustrating for offenses to work. But I think in Krejci's case, if he wants to stay in Boston, I think he just takes whatever as a contract. If he thinks he can cash in, if I'm him, I test it out, see if somebody wants to pay up. But if not, well, stay in Boston. That's fine. And I don't think Boston wants to lose him necessarily, but I don't think they want to commit the years to him either.
Right. They don't want to give him term at this point.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. He's 35. He's still producing, which is, that's awesome. But at what point is it going to stop? Right. I think that's the big question.
The other thing is we've been pretty critical of Hall, and then we saw the real Taylor Hall break out early on in the playoffs, and then he settled back into the Taylor Hall he really is now. 5 points in 11 games. That is Taylor Hall. He's not a point-a-game guy in the playoffs. He could be a point-a-game guy in the regular season, but he's also not a 90-point guy or anything like that anymore either. There has been a drop-off in his game. I think now we can see no matter what team he's on, he has moments. He has moments where he can control the play on the ice with his speed. Once in a while, he's willing to hit somebody. We've seen that. But in the end, he's not the point producer he once was.
And I think a lot of that is because of that injury he had a couple of years ago. He's been a much different player since that. And listen, that stuff happens and it stinks. But you have to be able to measure that up appropriately. Listen, Buffalo kind of they were just looking for a home run regardless last year. So that's fine, but it's not fine as far as Buffalo's concerned, but we'll
get to that team. Everybody's wondering.
Yeah,
we'll get to it. There is another Islanders point though. So now the thinking was that Trotz was sort of matching his goalies with the team they were facing, and maybe Sorokin would be better against Tampa because he is more athletic. But he's still not going to play the first game. Trotz is never going to pull Varlamov out of the first game after he's won a series. So no matter what, game one, you're going to see Varlamov. Now, if it isn't the best game one that they think he could play, then it's possible you could start to see Sorokin. But I don't think you'll see him after that. But I'm not sure what you guys think.
I honestly, I just stick with Varlamov. Honestly, like I get the theory that he sticks to try to match up the teams. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't buck Varlamov until
I wouldn't either.
He's like until he looks like he did at the end of the regular season. Like if he's playing that badly, fine. Like put it up to Sorokin. But Sorokin in the play, I mean, he's had some of those great games, but he's had a lot more off games than I think Varlamov's had, and I don't like how. I think if you make that kind of a move, I think that really puts a psychological swing on it for Tampa.
It does, and I get what you're saying. Sorokin, what you said about Sorokin is right. What we are hypercritical about with Varlamov is there's probably a goal every game or every other game that just looks ridiculous that it went in against him, but he does recover from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it reminds me a little bit of how Robin Lehner used to be. Lehner used to just be stellar like for an entire game, and then he'd give up one where you're just like, how did that go in? Like what happened to allow that to happen? So that, he gives up that kind of goal in that, that kind of game. I listen, it's a whole other thing with him, but like with Varlamov, I mean, hey, listen, sometimes guys just have a brain fart for a half second and that's what happens.
Well, I said,
what's his contract status?
Who?
Varlamov.
1 more year at 4 or something. Let me see.
Are they going to still go with these two, or are they going to trade Varlamov?
Sorokin is exempt, so they don't have a expansion draft problem.
No, they don't have an expansion draft problem, but they might have a cap problem.
Sorry,
and I wonder if are they going to go with these two all year? That's the question.
Varlamov is 2 more years at 5
2 more years. I know at least one team that's interested in him because I was told, and I kind of wonder if there's going to be overtures to trade for Varlamov maybe after the expansion draft.
Well, Sorokin's arbitration eligible, and we talked about his numbers, so he's probably going to get like $4 million in a settlement unless they sign him to a long-term deal.
Almost like at 4 and change, right?
5.
So is Lou really going to pay $9 million in net? That's the question.
He doesn't have a history of doing that, so I would say no. And if he can get value back for Varlamov, I would say okay. But what I said yesterday is I'm sticking with. If they've gone back to Sorokin, now back to Varlamov for the second time. If they go back to Sorokin again, I think they lose Varlamov in terms of like, okay, you keep going back and forth with me. No goaltender wants to be yanked twice in a playoff scenario. So I don't know if they're going to go to Sorokin again, then they have to stick with Sorokin because I think they might lose Varlamov in terms of just his focus on things. But anyway, all right, let's move to an area that Joe and I know very well, and that's the Buffalo, the story, the gift that keeps on giving, the Buffalo Sabres. Okay, so let's start.
And the Pops, wherever they are.
Yeah,
that's over here in Buffalo. They're looking for the Pagulas and Eichel right now.
Well, let's start with that because you wrote a piece for a column for Die by the Blade, in which you expressed your opinion that Jack Eichel and the Sabres are headed for a divorce.
And nobody read it.
Yeah.
According to Twitter yesterday, absolutely zero people read it.
But the point is, with the whole situation right now, with Eichel and his neck and the debate that's gone back and forth, and Kevin Adams talked about this a few weeks back and said that after a 12-week resting period that they would make a determination. Well, that passed, I think it was Memorial Day that passed, and still nothing has been resolved. There hasn't been any kind of plan of action in terms of him either having the surgery or starting any kind of rehabilitation. And Joe, Elliot Friedman came out today on WGR and said that more than likely they want to move on from Eichel. So where do you think this all stands right now?
I say it stands where I've said it stands this whole time, that this partnership is done. The whole point of my column yesterday was to kind of prepare people for like this is going to happen. There's no way to redeem any of this. I absolutely cannot see it because, I think of the availability Adams had kind of after that resting period where he said, listen, we're still not okay with him having the surgery, and neither are his doctors, which is the point he keeps making, which is passive aggressively telling Jack to go to hell about trying to get this operation done. And, we've only heard from Jack at the end of the season, and he made it pretty clear how he feels about things. And, you can take him saying that he's not happy with how things are going because he said it every year for the last 4 years.
Do we think this is going to go to mediations and actually going to get to that point?
I mean, it might. I think it might if he's not traded. I think that's absolutely how this is going to end up working out. Which at that point, you're just filing the divorce papers at that point, because right. I don't see how you mediate how a player feels that what he needs for treatment and what the team feels right. for it. Because now, if you got that disagreement, like you're not gonna have the common ground.
Yeah. Well, now if you're another team, sorry, Mike. If you're another team, there's a risk factor now. Mm-hmm. How much are you giving up for the risk factor? Oh, sorry. All right. I stole Mike's thunder. I didn't mean.
Let me just add to that, because I'm getting a Ryan O'Reilly vibe out of this. Because with O'Reilly, it wasn't injury; it was that big signing bonus. And I've heard from many people that said they got less in that trade because the Blues paid the bonus. And if the Pagulas would have paid it, they probably would have gotten somebody like Kyrou or Robert Thomas in the deal instead of Tage Thompson, which are better players. In this instance, the question mark that's hanging over everything is the injury, and how the hell as any team, unless you get a market generator where you get 4 or 5 teams bidding against each other, how the hell are you going to get anywhere close to equal value for Eichel when he's got this specter of a neck surgery hanging over him?
I think the easy way to do that is to eat a little bit of the contract along the way. Like, you can make, in a normal circumstance, you can make that trade and get whatever you want from a team because he's a top 10 player. Right. He's, the talent's elite, he can win an MVP if things go right. But obviously with this, it's a little different. Friedman said today that, even though teams won't go on the record with it, some teams are okay with bringing him on. Like if the next, they don't care about the neck thing, but some do. That's fair. Which leads to, you have some people being truthers about this and saying, well, what if the neck issue clears up the second he's traded?
Right.
Yeah. Hey,
well, I'm not going to go there.
That's a crazy leap of lack really of faith,
is.
But stranger things have happened, and that would be a Judas move by Eichel if all of a sudden, my neck is fine after he gets traded, and then he goes out and scores 100 points.
It would be a hell of a cudgel to swing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
So, just take it for everything on face value and understand that any news that comes out of this is filtered either through the team or the agent, and understand that whatever the gray area is in between, it still ain't good. And as far as getting a return on the deal, I think I understand the O'Reilly vibe, but that mess was all of the Sabres' own making. That was ownership coming over the top and saying, well, if he doesn't want to be here, we're not paying him. That's basically what that came down to.
Quote. We have to be fair about that. What O'Reilly said may have been true, but it wasn't the greatest quote at the time that a team was really hurting. And so that was part of what converged there, I felt at that time.
Yeah, but O'Reilly still wanted to help solve the problem.
He did.
In Buffalo. It wasn't like he was saying, get me out of here. It was just, he was saying, the losing stinks. I don't like it. It ruins the fun of playing hockey. Is any part of that wrong? I don't think so. No, in Jack's case, he was brought on to be the guy that leads the way for this. And he's seen.
But I will be fair. I understood why Buffalo got rid of him. It's not, and look, them getting a lousy return is on them.
Right.
But I understood why they got rid of him based on what he said. I do. Right. But organizations, they're not the only organization that would have done that.
But Joe, how is what O'Reilly said before being shipped out any different than sort of the disdain and the apathy expressed by Sam Reinhart and Rasmus Ristolainen in their exit interviews? They said everything except trade me the hell out of here in their end of year statements. And I'm like, okay, they clearly want out. O'Reilly maybe wanted to be part of the problem, but if everything stayed the same, he wanted out, and Eichel clearly wants out. I mean, what's the common denominator here?
Well, I'll just start with Allmark, because I think what he said is completely different. Because
yes,
think about it. His father passed away. He's been away from his family. He's got 2 young kids. His wife just had like a baby within their second kid within the last year. He's been away from Sweden for forever. He's just like, guys, I just want to go home. Like, I want to see my family. I want to be around my loved ones for the first time in forever. So I don't take that to mean that he wants to get out of Buffalo. I think he was just like, let me go home and see my family. I'll think about my next contract whenever my agent decides to call me on it. Reinhart's a different story, because I think a lot of what bothers Reinhart about stuff here is, it's losing it's getting a lot of the same questions constantly and having his effort questioned so often, which blows my mind, because he
does blow my mind too. Like, if anybody ever saw him before Buffalo, they would see a smart player and nothing but effort.
Yeah.
Totally greasy, totally smart, goes to the dirty areas. Like, he did so many good things.
And he's done that here. Like, he's done all that here. He was playing the front of the net for a couple of years. It's
thankless. It's really he's got the thankless job there. He does.
And you could determine this better than I, because even though I watched a lot of Sabres games, and you were at a few games at least, the move of Reinhart to center, which everybody said went really well, in a way is a statement of, against the Sabres organization, because they kept him on the wing for years and said he's not a center. And then he moves to center and he plays well. And it's like, okay, well, there's the number 2 center that you've been looking for all these years. He was right under your nose and you didn't even want to move, didn't even want to try. He played center in junior. He played center on the World Juniors. Yeah. What the hell?
I do wonder what part of that is Jack saying, like, hey, I want Sam on my wing. Like, let's make this work. I wonder, because Kruger did try to start off, separating the two, by having Sam play on the wing on the second line, and forget who he put on the right side. Oh, he started with like Thompson and Olofsson, I think, with the first line, with Thompson on the right, Olofsson on the left, but still with Sam on the wing. And then it was they were forced to put Sam at center because Eichel was out. All their centers were hurt, so it was just kind of like they traded Stahl. Yeah. So they were just kind of like, we got nobody else to play center. All right, Sam, you're a guy. And then it turns out, wow, he's really good at it, which I don't know if that's just a factor. I think a lot of that is the Don Granato factor of just saying, like, him hopping in there and being like, listen, you guys have been held back all season. Just play. Just go play. Let's try to have some fun out there. I know you lost 18 in a row, but like, let's try to have some fun with this. And I think Sam really leaned into that. It's not to say that it was like a carefree system, but it was way less restricting than it was under Kruger.
So let's talk about Don Granato. He's like the Dwight Schrute in this equation. He really is. Because right now, he's literally in that position that he wants, waiting for that position that he wants, and he's in another position. And it's exactly what happened to Dwight. And we all know what happened to Dwight. It was terrible. So I don't know what's going to happen here, but I just can't believe it's lingering this long. And it can't be just about interviewing college coaches anymore, because they've all been done for a very long time. If you're going to hire a college coach, you could have hired one already.
Yeah, it does make me wonder, and please forgive the fire engines coming around, but Sabres are on fire. We got to get them taken care of here.
En fuego!
Maybe it's going to the ankle bar. Anyhow.
But I think in this case, I think Adams has some people in mind that he wants to speak to first. And I do wonder if one of them is his old buddy from Carolina, Rod Brind'Amour,
who everybody wants to speak to.
Right. He's rumored for Seattle. He's rumored to just stay in Carolina. I think I think
the Rangers have stalled their stuff to speak to him.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Why not? Look at everything he's done with Carolina. Why wouldn't everybody want to talk to him? But I do believe that, Adams works with his connections a lot, and he's connected to Brind'Amour. So why not leave it open, have a discussion with him, and see if Brind'Amour would like to give up the all the good stuff he's got going in Carolina to come to Buffalo and try to figure this out. But I think if you're Granato, I think, he's done his interviews. They know his body of work by now. They know where they stand with him. They know that he wants the job, and they know that if they pick somebody else, he's probably not sticking around.
Let's expand the Brind'Amour thought, because I saw one of the local Carolina outlets was saying now the holdup is about getting all the assistants paid, which is what we heard a while ago. And my thinking is this.
A month ago.
This was a month ago, right? I appreciate what Rob Brind'Amour is trying to do. I don't understand what Tom Dundon is trying to do if this is really the case. Because if you're really holding this up based on some assistant salaries and maybe, what could we be talking about as a whole here dollar-wise? A couple of $100,000 to a billionaire?
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Brind'Amour reportedly, when all those rumors came out about him getting the phys ed staff and the physical therapy people and assistant coaches, he was agreeing to a contract that was well under what people like $1.8 million. When
the third lowest paid coach, I think.
When Ralph Kruger got $3.75 from the Sabres, so it's like,
Ralph's on a catamaran somewhere.
He's in Switzerland with with blowing an ogle horn but the thing is, if it was just that, the money that you're saving on Brind'Amour, I would agree to almost anything to get the assistant coaches to get everything done. There clearly has to be something more here than just it's the assistant coaches and the physical therapy people.
And you just wonder. Here's my wonder, Joe, and Kevin Allen yesterday said again he thinks Brind'Amour is already a done deal. And I said, but it seems like they're still negotiating, and now it's getting written that there are still negotiations, whether it's with him or other guys. But let's just take a leap of faith here that something happens with the other assistants, and they don't get paid exactly what Rod thinks they should get paid. And all of a sudden, Tom Dundon does kind of close the pocketbook on that, but not for him. He might rethink things. He's just a human being at this point. I know he's loyal. And he said, I hope so, when he's, said he's coming back. So he left it open. There is a point when you're at a job and you feel like, hey, to stay here, I need X, Y, and Z, because we've all been there. And if he just gets X and Y, it might be enough, and that might not be enough.
And I 100% buy that. Like there's always been this weird kind of thing with Carolina since Dundon's taken over. Like there's just been like a weird aura about it. Like like he handles things differently than other teams do, which sticks out like crazy in the NHL, because anybody deviating from the norm is just what's going on here. And Dundon certainly operated that way. When he cut Chuck Caton off their radio broadcast, like to get rid of him, it was just like, what are you doing, man? Like the guy's been around since the Whalers. Like, leave that alone. Like that's part of your franchise legacy.
Yeah.
And now he has to pay Forsland, and Forsland is in Seattle.
Right. So it's things like that that are just kind of like, why are you scrimping, cutting corners in these areas and not just paying people what they're worth, or just keeping it, keeping things going because it's going well. Like there's always different things that he sort of tinkers with, and it's just kind of like drawing weird lines. And I think if this doesn't pan out, this could be one of those weird lines where it's just like, no, if they're assistant coaches, why are they getting paid? Blah, 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 blah. I should only pay them blah, blah, blah. Like that doesn't work, man. Like if your head coach ain't happy and you're like, if he's not happy with your assistants being taken care of properly, he ain't gonna stick around. And the assistants sure as hell ain't gonna stick around.
Just going back to the Sabres here for a second, Joe, because one thing I don't, we don't know where the coaching situation that is going to end up. They've interviewed Tocchet, and obviously Granato is in the mix, but we're not going to know that for a little bit. Mm-hmm. But they win the lottery. Now they have the first pick for the second time in 4 years. Russ knows more about the draft prospects than I do, but it seems to me that the consensus, especially after the World Championships, is that Owen Power is the top prospect on the list. But the Sabres are, they have a pretty good backlog of young defensemen. So do you think that they'll just go with the number one guy of Power, or do you think there's a thought of maybe going for the best forward in the draft?
If it's me, I'm just like the Sabres have so many needs throughout the pipeline that you just take the best player, and that's Power. They have huge problems in the organization at forward. Like, just they have nobody. They got nobody left. Aaron Hugelin just came back from a back injury, and like he played great for the Fargo Force this year, but I mean he's 3 years away probably, maybe, from being in Rochester. I don't know. And
I'm still not 100% on Jack Quinn, but we'll see how that works out. I think he's a talent, but I don't know if he's an NHL talent.
I get so frustrated about Quinn because it was the wrong pick. It
was. I agree.
And they played him at center for some games this year.
Yeah, I know.
If you wanted a center, draft the center. Like, draft Rossi. Just pick the center. Pick Perfetti. It doesn't matter. Like, just take the center.
Like the natural center. I mean,
right.
The weird thing, and we talked about this a few days ago, Joe, and I guess we'll revisit it because why the hell not? If it wasn't for COVID, Rossi would have been playing in the NHL this year.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Quinn is years away from the NHL, and that's not his fault. Some development cycle, that's fine. But you knew that Rossi was going to play in the NHL. We all knew it. You didn't have to look very far, and they passed on that for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I can't, to this day, it never will make sense to me.
No, and it still frustrates me to no end, because when that pick came up last year, I said, just run to the podium, take Rossi. Just get him.
He was there.
And he's right there. Just grab him, and you come away a winner, because they were still able to get Peterka in the second round. And that was a guy they were supposedly high on. They were like, well, we can maybe spend trade up into the first and get him. Right. Trade out of the second, get into the first and get him, because they weren't sure if he was still going to be there. And, he might be their best forward prospect right now. Because Quinn's going to be he'll be a fine player, but taking him.
Let's clear this up. Cousins is no longer a prospect. He played a full year. So that's why he's not getting mentioned here. Let's just go with that. Okay.
Yeah. No,
save yourself further grief.
Once Jack or Sam get traded, he's the number one center. Like, that's just that's just how that's going to work. But but I mean, but the fact that you have to have a debate about whether or not Jack Quinn's your best prospect right now is
a bad debate.
That's a bad debate, because he was your seventh pick. Seventh pick of the draft, and you're just like, I don't know if he's going to be that good.
To me, they have to take Owen Power. I do feel like Matty Beniers is the best forward, but it doesn't matter, because I'll tell you what the difference is. It's about where they slot in the NHL. So Owen Power, I think, is a 1 or a 2. That's where I think he's headed. And Matty Beniers could be a first-line center, but most likely he's a second-line center. Mm-hmm. So even though you're getting that center, and we all talk about this, right? How many times do teams get guys? Now, it worked out for the Rangers with Zibanejad, and I agreed with the trade, because I felt like, you know what? He probably could take on a first-line center role, and he was good at it. When Derek Stepan took it on, it wasn't as good. It was okay. It was marginal. And that's what happens to a lot of teams in the league when you have a second line guy who should be playing first, a second line center who is playing first, and vice versa. When that happens, third line guy, you move everybody up. That's a big problem in the NHL. And so it's going to be hard for Beniers to be a number one. I don't think it's going to be hard for Power. And so at the end of the day, why am I not taking the guy with the better trajectory, even though, hey, I think Matty Beniers could be a 25, 30-goal guy, and he's great defensively, and he's terrific on faceoffs. That still doesn't mean he's a number one center. I don't know that.
Well, here's my thought on, and this is an idea I've kicked around, and this ties in with Eichel. It's just the same. If Anaheim's a team that you're looking at for Eichel, I think you make Anaheim throw in that number 3 pick.
Yes.
As part of the deal. And, maybe, come in with a high ask, we're going to need Zegras and Drysdale and a first. And they'll be like, no, we're not going to do that. And then you're just like, all right, fine. We'll take Henrique and your first and, somebody who's not Zegras or Drysdale.
Right.
And then move on from there. But at least then you can take Power at 1, and then at 3, you're just kind of like, all right, we can take Beniers, we can take Eklund, we can take
with the personnel they had there, they'll be taking Matty Beniers at that point. Right. They have so many NTDP guys there. We kind of know that would be a done deal.
Yeah, it's basically a foregone
Unless they were going to go and
but
take the leap of Luke Hughes. That would be the only thing. There is a Jack Hughes in the draft, by the way. That'll confuse the crap out of everybody. We're not going to talk about the other Jack Hughes right now. But unless they were going to take the leap, though, with Luke Hughes, which, based on the injury, I would wait and see watch him skate before I put him that high.
But I think about that with Anaheim, and I just think if the Ducks are the team you're going to trade Eichel to, that's the first thing I want is your number 3 pick. Like everything else can get figured out after that, because then you don't have to worry about having a debate anymore. Anaheim gets their situation figured out because now they have an absolute number 1 star. Somebody to take over for Getzlaf because he's getting older. You move out Henrique. Probably.
They still need a number 2 defenseman, though. They actually could use Power because him and Drysdale would be magic, but they won't get him now. Right. So based on what you're saying, it makes perfect sense.
Right. So like the Ducks know they're not going to get their guy. Like, and I don't think are you going to take Edvinsson at 3? Probably not. I wouldn't. But I mean, but like that's the debate they're going to have.
Honestly, at 3, if I'm there and if I'm Anaheim at 3. I will take Brandt Clark because at worst, I've now got 2 really great offensive defensemen. Yeah. And you know what? I'll find someone for that. Clark turns into that if he figures out how to play better defensively because he's got every other tool.
And with Anaheim, they've got 2 of their veteran defensemen whose contracts are up after next year, Manson and Lindholm. So, they've got Drysdale in the pipeline and Fowler's locked up long-term and Shattenkirk for a couple years. But, they're going to need an influx of talent on the blue line. So I would think, and Russ, they've always been extremely good at recognizing talent on defense. And so, I mean, but the question with Anaheim is being able to score. They just simply couldn't score at all.
Now, look, they could sit 3 and go William Eklund, and I can't kill the pick. There's a chance he could play center, because he did play it in Swedish junior hockey, but he really has been a winger lately. And he's definitely a scoring type who can get to the NHL quicker than a lot of the other guys in this draft. I mean, they might go that route. They might. If they don't make the Eichel trade, obviously.
Right. Switching to tonight's game, Game 6, Colorado and Vegas. One little note here that may play out over the next few hours. Jared Bednar, apparently there is some question of whether his COVID test was a false positive or not. He's separate from the team. He was not at the morning skate today, so his ability to be behind the bench tonight is in question. I'm sure that'll get straightened out before, but that's a distraction I'm sure that Colorado doesn't need right now, Joe. And honestly, I told Russ after Game 5, which I thought Colorado had in hand up 2-0 after 2 periods. I thought were the better of the 2 teams after 2 periods, and they simply gave it all away in the first 3 minutes of the 3rd period. Not that, Vegas took the opportunities and they scored on them, but I thought Colorado, 2 bad giveaways led to 2 goals. Then it was a tie game for the 3rd period, and then the goal by Stone wins it. And now Vegas has all the advantages going home in Game 6. With the possibility of winning the series and going on to beat Montreal in the next round. But what do you think of this game tonight?
It's this whole series has been fascinating. It's been a lot of fun to watch, first off, but it's been fascinating to see how things just kind of get turned on its head because, the first couple of games, Colorado just dunked all over Vegas, and it was just like, geez, okay, they're going to roll over everybody, send it away, it's done. And things flipped. Like you get some clutch goals, you get a couple of overtime winners, and suddenly you're just sitting pretty. And Colorado, I'm very surprised at how they've looked like they haven't really been able to rebound from it. And the way they lost in Game 5, I'm going to be really interested to see how they come out tonight in Game 6, because the way they respond to that is gonna tell me a lot about what this team's made up of. And I choose to believe that guys like Landeskog are gonna step up and have a monster game. But man, Vegas finds ways to just kind of clamp down without really being totally, just one-minded about it. Like they're very, it reminds me a lot of how the Devils and Kings played back in 2012, where it was like, if you skate into them, you're in for a bad time. But if you get sloppy with the puck ever, they're going to run it right back at you, and you better be ready. Sure. And that's where I'm kind of stuck on this, because I want to believe that McKinnon and Landeskog and Rantanen are going to be able to jump into it and be able to take it to a Game 7. But man, Vegas is just so resilient, and they play so hard. It's hard for me to really say that that they can just like roll over that team.
Russ,
right. So okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say this. There's a potential dream sequence here for Avalanche fans and for Kraken fans, and that is, let's say Bednar can't play, right? Let's say Nolan Pratt has to take over. He's been there 5 years. There is talk that Seattle could be waiting on him, and to work with their young guys and take a young coach. And he was a player, and he played for the Whale, I think.
Yes, he did.
So there is a connection there with old GM Ronnie there. So I think that if that happens and the Avalanche win this game, that's a big deal. The one thing I do worry about, and I do think this is starting to be a thing, even though I picked the Avalanche and I'll stick with them because I like their talent, if they lose again this year, then we are going to question, do they know how to win? And they are going to maybe have to get more players that know how to win. Similar to the Leafs, but they're a little further along talent-wise. But I do think it's going to be a fair question to ask. Look, it's easy to say, the first line's going to ramp it up, but they've been shutting them down. I think it's going to have to be something other than the first line, to be honest, because they have been getting shut down, and they have the guys to shut them down. I mean, again, Pacioretty has always been good defensively, and Stone, I could pick him for the Selke every year and never look back on that.
Well, Joe, okay, they got through the games 3 and 4 of the St. Louis series, and they started off like gangbusters in this series without Nazem Kadri. But I think over the last few games, they've missed that number 2 center. My personal feeling is that Nazem Kadri will not be a member of the Avalanche next year after doing the same thing that he did in Toronto twice, and that they won't forgive him because it's just even I think it was Ed Olczyk said that he let his team down. He bailed on his team by doing something stupid like that. But they really miss him. They miss that second line strength that he provides. I mean, and they need to get to Game 7 to get him back.
Right.
But it put them in a very bad position because you're forcing guys like JT Compher to jump up into that second line spot. And that's not where he's the best used. Honestly. Exactly. I mean, that's not what his
role wins a lot of faceoffs against third line centers. It's true.
Yeah. And, and he's not the playmaker that Kadri is. He's not the goal scorer Kadri is. And that's why I'm so conflicted on the Kadri thing, because he makes such an easy scapegoat if Colorado's bounced out in the series, because I do think this series is totally different if he's available to them, because that's a matchup problem for Vegas, because Vegas isn't totally strong up the middle.
This is the history of Nazem Kadri, so we can't even go there. We know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a known quantity. You just got to hope that maybe it doesn't happen. You got to hope that like one of these playoffs, he just decides to not crack some guy in the skull. But that's like the way that's the edge that he plays on. He plays that he's a pest. He's kind of ratty, but like he's such a dynamic player. I love him. I think he's a fantastic player, but it's tough. He makes it tough to like be totally like cuddly with him if you're a fan of him. Like it's just the little things that pop up and you're just like, oh, not again, please. And there's no question it's hurt Colorado in this series, but to like cast him out, man, I could think of a lot of teams that would just be like, yes, please, we'll take a number 2 center. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, right. But I mean, the fact that he keeps doing what he's doing, it's like Tom Wilson. It's like, when are you going to learn your lesson? Oh, no, I'm just going to keep playing this way and just keep getting suspended at the worst possible time, because it's been 3 times in the playoffs at the worst possible time he does this. So,
well, I mean, Wilson keeps getting away with it too. So,
right.
And I know everybody feels like last game, was a big sucker punch. Kevin Allen talked about Adrian Data writing that the worst one in franchise history. Maybe so, but a lot of times teams can recover from that. McKinnon is the kind of guy that can get you past that because he is a winner and it has a winning mentality. So, again, we're also talking about Rantanen. That one play that he missed on an open net was crazy because he had been so good all series. Like, he hits that, I don't know, that probably changes things. So, I mean, it's just the way it is that in the playoffs. Like, it's so tight in this series now that Vegas definitely has the edge. There's no question they have the edge. But it doesn't mean they can't be wrestled away, and it doesn't mean they can't go back to a Game 7 in Colorado where they know, they'll get Kadri back, they get a home game back, and maybe they even get their coach back. Like this could turn into a motivating thing if Bednar actually isn't on the bench.
The funny part of this series, though, is that I look at it is that Vegas kind of spotted Colorado game 1.
Yeah, they did.
And now they've won 3 out of 4 games with Fleury back in the net. Like, I mean, it's not to knock on Leonard, because it seemed like a weird move to begin with, that, after Fleury was so great in the opening round, that they were just like, what are you doing? Why is Leonard starting? And then they were just like, no, we just need Fleury to get a little more rest. Like, okay, I guess he is older, but
you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me, like, back in the day, I would play like basketball or paddleball. If it was basketball, my dad and I would do like foul shots. If it was paddleball, we would just play a full game, and he would spot me 1 or 2, right? Because I was younger and he's the old guy. He's like, I'll give you a couple. It's all right. And, it is like this, right? Because they're the older team and the Avalanche are the younger team. You brought me back to that, Joe. I don't like that place.
Well, I wonder what Leonard's mindset going forward is, because clearly we were talking about this after that game. He was not the backup in game 2. Now, I don't know if he's been the backups in games 3, 4, and 5, but
he has not been talked about at all.
Right. And that's, we don't know what's going to happen with Fleury after the year. Are they going to stick with $12 million allocated?
I think they are.
Yeah. Just to finish off the show here, Aaron Portzline just posted a piece on The Athletic and updated on Columbus and a few other of the coaching situations. He said that the leading candidate for the Columbus job is assistant coach Brad Larson, who was coaching under Todd Richards and Tortorella the last 7 seasons. He said that the Rangers are waiting to see what happens on Brind'Amour, but the leading candidate looks to be Gallant. And that Tocchet has interviewed at least with 4 clubs, including Seattle, the Sabres, Columbus, and the Rangers. So
Tocchet twice with the Rangers. And I think it was twice with Buffalo, Joe. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that they interviewed Tocchet when they hired Kruger. So until Gerard Gallant's name is announced as the Ranger head coach, I'm still not 100% that that's what is happening. It's very rare that, especially that media members from other markets sort of get it right with the Rangers, because a lot of times they don't know until the last minute, to be honest, because there's a lot of different players there and a lot of different voices. Chris Drury, yes. Is he the final say? Sure, sort of. He's still got to pass it through a few people too. And so, I just don't know. I mean, I think Gallant's an excellent coach, right? I don't know if he can handle New York for a couple seasons if things aren't going fantastic. Like, because next year they're going to expect to make the playoffs. Even though this year I didn't think they would, and they didn't, and I'm okay with that. But some people aren't, and clearly the owner's not. He's going to be expected to make the playoffs right away. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen in the first year, can he handle that second-year pressure in New York? Remember, what was it, towards his first year? He was squirting a water bottle. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, Tocchet interviewed with Buffalo when they hired Housley. That was that summer. Because Tocchet then went to Arizona that same year. But I know that's been their MO in the past, is to talk to people that they've spoken to before, just to kind of not backtrack, but just check to make sure that they didn't screw something up. And that's what happened with the Bills. Right. They had Sean McDermott in there when they hired, when they talked to Rex Ryan, and they opted for Rex Ryan, and they were lucky to get McDermott back a few years later.
Jesus. Well, the hiring of Larson in Columbus would lead me to believe, and it's not that this isn't going out on a limb here, that Columbus is going to be going through some sort of rebuild, because that's not not a coach you go when you think you're going to make the playoffs. That's somebody who's going to be there for the long haul. And he's been there for 7 years already. That's somebody who's willing to stick around for 2 or 3 years while they sort out things. And
I would trade Laine at the draft, honestly.
Well, they may trade Laine. Talk about, Buffalo conceivably could trade in one off season, could trade Reinhart, Ristolainen, and Eichel. Columbus in one off season could conceivably trade Laine and Seth Jones. And then what's going to happen with Werenski with a year left before he's a UFA? So these are 2 organizations that it could be major roster upheaval. So, we'll see. All right, Joe, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'll have you on again pretty soon, because the stories never stop with the Sabres.
As I say, the drama never ends in Buffalo when it comes to the Sabres. That's for sure.
No. So for Joe Yerdon, for Russ Cohen, for Anna, And I'm Michael Angello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz,